southern Hemi swell is hitting California. I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, May 19th.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
If you enjoyed the video, remember to give us a thumbs up. If you hasn't subscribed, click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of the screen below. You'll get automatic notifications when the videos are posted, typically on Sunday evenings. If you have a comment or a question, be sure and write them up down below. We'd be happy to answer. And if you'd like to make a contribution to the cause, you can. Hit the super thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. With that, I'd like to thank the folks that donated last week. Jake Marlowe. Whopping big contribution, Jake. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Reed Carter, another large contributor as well. I saw you read out in the water today. Thank you very much. Again, I'll make it official here, but I said it to your face as well. And then Mark Herlock, another good contributor. And then our longtime list of contributors, Evolution Moto and Tim Caston. Thank you all so much. And with that, let's get to work. As usual, we'll start by looking at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean. There is a gale producing 26-foot seas, but they're all sort of aimed more to the northwest. I mean, maybe there's some swell that Hawaii could get from this. We'll have to take a look as we do our deep dive. Another little piece of a gale trying to push under Tasmania and New Zealand, but probably not much of a swell producer. But first, let's take a look at current conditions. And as I alluded to in the intro to this video, there is swell hitting. We're going to start up in Northern California. We're going to Point Sur, California, sort of off of Monterey Bay, a little south there, buoy number 157. We're looking at all the swell energy that's hitting that buoy from all the way up at 33.3 second period. That'd be super long period energy from like a big winter storm, the whole way down to 5 second period pure wind chop. And you see each of the period bands that the buoy monitors right here. We're looking for where the bumps are, like right there. There is a peak of a swell with periods somewhere in the maybe 18-second range. And then we also see a larger swell, but much less period in the 10-second range. So this is probably just locally generated wind swell. This is our southern hemi swell coming from a very long ways away. We use some fancy math. It's not just one spot here. It's pretty much all the area under the curve right here and right here that represents the swell. So what do we have? Primary swell, 7.8 feet at 9.8 seconds from 312 degrees. That's our wind swell. Theoretically, that makes surf at 7.5 feet, but it isn't that big. And then the secondary swell, which is really the main attraction, is the southern hemi swell, 2.6 feet at 17.8 seconds from 214 degrees. That theoretically would make surf at 4.6 feet. This is a average over a I think it's a 20-minute to a half-hour window, something like that. So there's two readings from these C-dip buoys every hour. There have been some pure swell readings up to 3 feet at 17 to 18 seconds. 3 feet at 17 to 18 seconds is what I would call significant class swell. I think we're just under the threshold. That said, there were waves today that were, 2 feet overhead or something like that, maybe even a little bit more at top spots on the peak, but it was not super consistent and all the buoys weren't reading it all the time, so this one doesn't make the grade. But still, that's not to say there isn't good surf. Then we go look in Southern California, Point Loma South buoy. This is off of San Diego, buoy number 191. Same deal, without the wind swell, just the pure long period swell energy. Actually, there's 1, 2, you can almost see 3 different southern hemi swells all in the water at the same time, though the main event here is right in the 17-second range. 2.4 feet at 17.1 seconds from 211 degrees. That would make surf at 4 feet, but for sure it's another biggest set's 50% higher than that, maybe 6 feet, something like that. And then there is some wind swell, 1.9 feet at 13.9 seconds mixed in that. Actually, that's not wind swell. That's swell, one of the previous swells still fading out. So a bit of energy in the water. And then we go over to the south shore of the Hawaiian Islands, Lanai, protected from all the wind swell, buoy number 239. Again, now here is yet another peak hitting there. This is the third in a series. There's actually 3 swells that have hit California, or queued up for California and Hawaii. The really interesting part about this is both these swells in Hawaii have overperformed, did way better than what the models were saying. This new peak here, now this might just be a single spike, but you can see at 18 seconds, pretty solid. Primary swell 3.1 at 18 seconds from 191 degrees. That's surf at 5.6 feet. And that said, the previous swell, which was the one that's currently hitting California, it overperformed in Hawaii as well. I mean, a couple days ago, there was surf 3 or 4 feet overhead at top spots in Hawaii. Unfortunately, there was a lot of south wind, a lot of south wind lump in the water. That doesn't mean that people weren't surfing, but it wasn't as pristine as one would normally hope for. All right, so where is all this coming from? So we're going to go back in time to Monday, the 6th of May. So what's that, like 2 weeks ago? There was a gale developed under not even Tasmania, under South Australia with 38.8 foot seas. That's right. These are the highest seas over this entire domain. Here's their actual coordinates. And winds at that location were 53.1 knots. So pretty solid gale, but to get swell from way back here and then have it wrap the whole way around and up into California and everything, that's a pretty tall order. So it wasn't until the gale gets about south of Tasmania is really where the functional swell window opens. And this was on Monday night, almost 2 weeks ago, 35.9 foot seas. And then by the time it got directly under New Zealand, we were down to 29 foot seas. That was on Tuesday morning, the 7th of May. So this was what I called the primer gale. It wasn't even supposed to do a whole lot, but that's what hit California on Friday and Saturday. And the interesting part about it was there was another gale that developed directly behind, bigger and stronger. So this one was good for maybe a 17-second period swell. And then this guy came along with 38-foot seas and over a larger area. This was on late Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, the 8th of May, again with like 37 feet, again up to 38, almost 39 feet on Wednesday, the 8th of May, and continuing into Wednesday evening. Much broader, much larger, higher seas pushing deeper into the South Pacific proper. This swell effectively overtook the primer swell starting even yesterday in California. So the primer swell is there, but you can't even hardly see it. This is the guy that is producing all the surf that's hitting, Southern California, Northern California. And then there was yet another system after that. So that one faded out, and then you got this other little dinkly thing right here on Sunday, the 12th of May, but then right behind it, boom, here came Sunday, the 12th of May again, but seas were building. That's what, 36 feet? This is registering these seas here, since they're the highest seas, but they're all aimed at Antarctica. So that's 30, 32, 34, 36 feet. Let's see if we did something better. That was 36 feet, and then fading from there, but still present into Monday. This would have been almost a week ago. This is the swell that's currently hitting Hawaii and bound for California. Typically, it's about, just on average for New Zealand swells, it hits Hawaii, and about 2 days later, it shows up in California. So if this one's hitting Hawaii today on Sunday, then Tuesday, another round of swell bound in for California. Now, after that, we are into Tuesday and Wednesday of last week. Things kind of settled down. Yeah, there was this gale over here, but it's not really, it's shadowed by New Zealand relative to California and not really well aimed up the Tasman Sea relative to Hawaii. So here's Friday, Saturday. You see just really nothing going on. There's this little gale last night, Saturday night, that developed right off the edge of Antarctic ice there. Yes, it's possible we could get some swell from that, but not really holding my breath. If it shows up, it's more of a gift than an expected result. So then there was a request to let's dig into altimetry just a little bit. We got a reasonable pass over the very last piece of the gale that produced the swell that's hitting California now. In fact, if you go back, you can see not the satellite, and this whole thing you don't get satellite passes all the time over all the ocean. So what's happening is you have, let's say this is the Earth, and it's a polar orbiting satellite. So it goes over the North Pole and the South Pole in the same circle. And what happens is the Earth turns under it. So it takes about 90 minutes to make one pass the whole way around the planet. And as the Earth turns, it takes about a week to cover every square inch of the Earth's surface. But every now and then you get lucky, and these passes go right over top of storms. There's an altimeter, a radar altimeter. It beams radar down through the clouds, bounces off the ocean surface, and returns. And the satellite, or actually, there's some fancy math going on, but they know exactly how long it should take if the sphere of the ocean is perfectly flat. They know how far away the satellite is from the Earth. It's in a perfectly round orbit. So they go, I don't know what the time distance is, but beams down, comes back, and it's the difference in the time versus the expected time that tells them that something's going on in the ocean's surface. If you have a big sea, a 30-foot sea, the radar beam will return to the satellite a little bit earlier than if it was a dead calm sea state. All right. And you get a reading from that. And as the satellite's going around, it's just going ping, 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 and just shooting, one after the other, these beams down off the ocean surface. Okay. And you can literally see, if you look real close, there's just a whole bunch of little slices of data here. Now, there's numbers here that I have peeled off here, 20, 30, 31, 28 feet, 30 feet. But those are like it's just, if I put a tag on every single satellite thing, it would just be a blur of numbers and you couldn't read anything. Okay. But within this domain, this frame here, the max measurement, the highest measurement anywhere along the satellite track, and you can see it here, but is 41.3 feet at 59,176 west. So 176 west so it's like somewhere right in here, but that's just one reading. Okay, now is that, there's a bunch of air checking and stuff in the data. So actually what we get from the satellite is this compact, consider it like a giant Ziploc ball of data, and you have to decode it. It's really like it's compressed like a JPEG compression, effectively, okay? And you have to decompress it, and then it has thousands upon thousands of these little slice readings, and then there's a whole bunch of air check flags and quality check flags and all that to tell you whether the data is good or bad, or some of the metadata about the data, if you will. Anyway, the short of it is 41.3 feet. Yeah, it's possible if two waves were slamming together. It's a raw sea state out here, but that's probably not an accurate measurement. But the max average measurement, 33.5 feet, and right in that same area, somewhere about here, was 33.5 feet. So what this is about is I'll go through and just do a 15 reading average of all the thousands of readings, just a running average. Whenever you get 15 readings that are higher than the previous 15 readings averaged out, then I save it, right? And then when you go over the whole block, we get a 15 reading. This is a max average measurement. It's over 15 readings. And it just gives you sort of a sense of, another way to test how good is the data here. I normally look at the max reading and go, that's good, but this seems a little bogus. It's possible, but at a minimum, 33 feet. The point being, these readings here are higher than what the wave model shows. And that's the point of this. The wave models are based on, some satellite data, but what it's really based on is the GFS wind model that calculates how high the seas should be given certain fetch conditions over a period of time over a part of the ocean surface, and goes, well, do a bunch of fancy math, and if you have 50 knot winds over 500 square nautical miles for 12 hours, you should get X amount of sea state. It's actually way more complex than that, okay? But the models aren't always right, as we all know. that's why we look at the altimetry data, and it then tells us, well, sure enough, the models weren't right, or what was really happening in this situation. 6 hours earlier, seas were higher, these were fading. The satellite passed over somewhere in between the two and picked up the measurements here. If the measurements are plus or minus 3 hours of the model state, and which one was this? This is the 06Z, so if it was anywhere from 3Z to 9Z, I painted on the picture, okay? Just, just sort of do it that way. So not inconsequential coding to try to make all this work. But anyway, gives you an idea of how close are the models, are they accurate or not accurate, and clearly we know that I think the models actually undercalled the swell that's currently hitting, not only in terms of seas, but also in terms of the swell that is actually hitting our coast. So that's a little bit of background on the, and the Jason 3 satellite. Okay, actually there was 3 of them. Jason 1 satellite launched in December 7th of 2001. It was doing the same sort of thing as this one. It was supposed to last for 3 to 5 years. It actually lasted 11 years. Then in 2008, they launched the Jason 2 satellite on June 20th, 2008, and it did its thing, and then eventually it craps out, right? And then on January 17th, 2016, we now have the Jason 3 satellite, and I'm kind of wondering when Jason 4 is going to show up, because all these seem to have a lifespan of about 7 to 8 years, so maybe it's time. Hopefully this guy will last longer, especially with the solar storms going on. I think that kind of puts some stress on these satellites because they have no atmosphere to protect them. All right, let's move on. So we know we've had effectively 3 storms with 3 swells in the water. Swell number 1 and number 2 are hitting California right as we speak. Swell number 3 is hitting Hawaii now, bound for California in about 2 days. What's coming after that? Well, we're going to start by looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales. When those gales form, help direct their track. We are looking for a trough, a push in the jet to the north. We don't really see one. We have a split flow here. Northern branch here. It's the southern branch that does all the magic. But okay, let's assume this is a trough. It really isn't. But that would help create a clockwise flow aloft and eddy and down at the ocean surface. That's the hallmark of low pressure in the southern hemisphere. And of course, low pressure generates winds. Winds eventually get traction on the ocean surface, and they impart energy to the ocean, creating seas. Those seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area, the shorter period elements die off, and what that happens is it exposes or grooms out the pure, quote-unquote, pure swell, the longer period swell energy. And of course, swell when hits your beach turns into surf. So as of Sunday, May 19th, today, there is nothing in the upper atmosphere that suggests there's any storm production coming. But when we get into Tuesday, May 21st, well, there's a little hint of something, a trough. There's New Zealand right there, so southeast of New Zealand. But there we go. It's looking a little better, so maybe some hope there. But then we know, because I cheated and I looked, there we go. Now, there is a legitimate trough forecast out on Friday, the 24th of May, under New Zealand, aimed well to the north. That looks like it would be capable. Look at it, just almost pushing due north, right east of the New Zealand coast. That looks like a good supporter for gale development. Now, the deal is, well, it's a week out. Do we believe the models? Probably not, but it's something to keep your eyes on. And if anything, it looks like additional troughing is forecast behind that. So we'll get all this surf, then there's probably going to be about a week where things are going to die. And then if this, at least the upper level model is right, then maybe another swell or swells after that. But the jet stream doesn't produce surf. It just is the foundation for producing storms. We need winds blowing on the ocean surface, imparting energy to the ocean. So we're looking at surface level pressure. There we go. GFS, surface winds, and surface pressure, right? So we're looking for winds, preferably 45 knots or greater, but in a pinch, we'll take 40 knots. Well, here we go. Sunday night, little area 40-knot winds there. Oh, there's that little gale, that sort of a cutoff gale. I don't know that anything's really going to result from that, but the folks on the south shore of Oahu, I'm sure, my friends over there, I'm sure will write in and tell me that I blew it when and if swell hits that location. Of course, we'll update all that on the forecast on stormsurf.com. So there is a little gale here forecast on Wednesday. Now notice 40-knot winds all aimed due south, and just this small area, 35-knot winds pushing off to the northeast. Don't know. There we go. That looks a little bit better as we get into Wednesday night and Thursday. But then here comes yet another something under New Zealand on Thursday. And let's see where this goes. And then you get into Friday night. There's 40-knot winds aimed more to the north, right where that trough was supposed to be. Building area 40 with even 45-knot winds down here on Saturday, the 25th of May. 45-knot winds aimed due north. That looks pretty impressive, honestly. If it were not a week out, I would go, oh, that looks great. Right now, it's just sort of we'll keep our eyes on it. There we go, a week out with yet more fetch developing right behind it. We know the Jetstream's configured well. This should be something to look forward to. So you'll have, theoretically, after all this surf, you get a week to actually go do real work and try to recover a little bit. And then theoretically, we could be back in business. But let's go see what the effect of those winds on the ocean surface. So here we are, significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean. What do we have? 26.8 foot seas aimed. Well, Hawaii's at 158. Yeah. Theoretically, if you believe it, southeast swell for the Hawaiian Islands. Maybe not much of a swell, but maybe a little bit, maybe. Now we see other gale activity as we get into Monday and Tuesday, pushing under New Zealand. We know there's supposed to be something developing out here around Wednesday. There we have, 25-foot seas. I'm eyeballing this at the same time. Under Tasmania. There's 28-foot seas. There's 33-foot seas aimed sort of up this way. So this looks like maybe more of a Chile, Peru, Central America, Mexico, and certainly Southern California and Northern California. But notice the area of 34-foot seas. Is it 34? Yeah, 34 is the peak. Very tiny, just a couple of pixels compared to what the swell that we are having right now. All right, then we get into Saturday. Here we go with 29-foot seas building, almost 30 feet. There's 30 feet. And then Sunday, a little bit more as the gale reorganizes, 35 feet, 35 feet, and then fading out. So potentially looking good. And here comes the next one behind it. The models, these models actually go out 2 weeks. But if you've ever looked at a 2-week model, anything past a week is a complete waste of time, not even worth looking at. I'm not going to tease you and get you into thinking there's going to be some mega swell, because they literally never show up. A week is the hairy edge of believability on any of these sort of storms. All right, so let's now look at local wind forecasts. California here, Hawaii here. And the real concern, or the area of interest, is Southern Hemi swell. This is San Francisco up here. That's Cape Mendocino, Point Conception down there. Southern California here, protected by the Channel Islands. The issue is going to be wind. We have a gradient developing. High pressure, 1032 millibars. Winds circulate clockwise around it. A little bit of a heat low inland, or just the configuration of the coast tightens up the isobars enough. 30-knot north winds off of Cape Mendocino, generating wind swell. And that, it doesn't wipe out the Southern Hemi swell, but what it does is it buries it in, if this is 8, 9, 10 seconds and is hitting sets every 5 minutes, and you have a Southern Hemi swell, even if it's a let's say a head high swell, but you only get a set once every 20 or 30 minutes, you'll never even see the Southern Hemi swell, except at the most protected breaks. So the focus here is these northwest winds and what they're going to do. Hawaii under a southeast trade regime. So we get into Monday, the gradient builds 35 knot north winds with 20 knot north winds, pushing right up, if not impacting the central California coast south of Monterey Bay. Southeast trades 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands, so that's not too bad. Same deal. Notice a little bit of a break locally along the coast, so not so much northwest wind right on central California beaches, but with 30 knot winds right off of, what is that, Point Arena? That's, 10 or 11 second period north wind swell and not insignificant wind swell. Trades for the Hawaiian Islands. As we get into Wednesday, same deal, both California and Hawaii. Thursday, the gradient tries to fade out. By then, the swell should be fading in California. And trades 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. By Friday, still the northwest winds not letting up. I mean, at least they're not 30 to 35 knots, but 25 knots, so that issue. And then Saturday, still the gradient persists, and with all this wind, temperatures are going to take a dive as well. Trades light, 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. And Sunday, a week from now, still northwest winds. Let's see if we can get there. It almost looks like the gradient's trying to fade, with low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska sort of cutting a notch out of the high pressure system, and trades for the Hawaiian Islands. All right, let's go take a look long term and what's going on with the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, and ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. These two oscillations are the major influencers of weather in the North and South Pacific, and as it relates to swell potential, and in winter months in the Northern Hemisphere, rainfall. So we start by looking for signs of the MJO, specifically the active phase of the MJO. There are two phases, the active phase and the inactive phase. The MJO rotates west-east around the planet right above the equator. Active phase of the MJO on one side of the planet, inactive phase on the other side. The active phase is like a low-pressure system, the inactive phase like a high-pressure system. What happens is when the active phase starts moving into the West Pacific, because it's a low-pressure system, it takes warm, moist air down at the ocean's surface, starts lifting it aloft. That warm, moist air, one condenses into clouds, and that's key in understanding some of the charts ahead. But even more importantly, that warm, moist air is energetic. It gets caught up in the jet stream, both in the north and southern hemisphere, and that energy then invigorates the jet stream, prevents it from splitting, helps it consolidate, builds winds in the jet stream that feed the troughs, that feed the gales, which feed the storms, which make surf. So the active phase is the good phase of the MJO. The inactive phase is a high-pressure system. It is falling air and basically does nothing to support storm development. And if anything, it feeds high pressure over the Pacific. And that's good for generating trade wind swell relative to the Hawaiian Islands. But otherwise, it doesn't do a whole lot for pure long-period ground swell production. All right, so with that said, what we're looking for is, this is a chart from the TAO buoy array, a series of buoys strung across the equator in the Pacific used for monitoring El Nino. But there are wind sensors on those buoys, so we're looking at the arrows. The longer the arrows, the stronger the winds. This is the East Pacific here, West Pacific here. That's the equator. The date line's right there. New Guinea's right there. We're just looking at the arrows, and in general, the arrows are saying trades pretty strong out of the East over the East Pacific, pretty strong out of the East over the Central Pacific, pretty strong out of the East over the West Pacific. But it is not the actual wind speeds. It is the difference from normal for this time of year. They call them anomalies, wind anomalies. So you're looking here, and I'm looking at the arrows, and I go, well, they're not any stronger out of the east. They're kind of not even east or west. So basically, these wind speeds here are normal. Over the Central Pacific, same deal. And over the West Pacific, pretty much normal. So no indicator of the active phase of the MJO, but no indicator of the inactive phase either. Maybe just a neutral pattern. Let's go look at the forecast. 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies. All that's saying is the wind blowing stronger out of the east than normal, which would be the inactive phase of the MJO, or stronger out of the west than normal, which would be the active, the good phase of the MJO. But this is the whole planet on one chart, so we want to just look at the Pacific Ocean, and this is just on the equator. That's all that matters. Starts at 125 east, so right there. And the real area that matters is the West Pacific, over to about 170 west. I call it the Kelvin wave generation area, or this is where if the active phase of the MJO moves like off of, the equatorial West Pacific, off of New Guinea in that area, that's where it really does its magic in feeding energy to the jet stream. All right, so the blues are easterly anomalies, so we're looking right pretty much down the middle of the chart here. But here is today, May 19th. So this is past performance. So we see blues, easterly anomalies. I'd say that's the inactive phase of the MJO. Now here's some reds. This is maybe the active phase of the MJO. But as of today, there's maybe a day left of it. And then boom, a giant pocket of blues. So inactive phase of the MJO setting up with no real change forecast for these are 5-day intervals, so this is a 2-week period. So inactive phase looks like it's setting up. That said, the inactive phase doesn't mean there isn't going to be storms, but what it means is if you have the active phase is really what kind of adds some extra juice to everything. So what was going on right here, I think, was responsible for the 3 swells that we have in the water right now from a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And then when I look at the model a week from now, it says, oh, there's going to be, this big gale under New Zealand. I see all these easterly anomalies right when that's going to happen. And I go, that probably makes it a little less likely that it's going to happen. That's not to say that it won't happen, but the odds are not as favorable as if the active phase were in play. Let's go look at some more models. All right, outgoing long-wave radiation forecast. Remember when I said in the active phase, the MJ moves over the West Pacific, it's low pressure, it takes warm, moist air, lifts it aloft, and that moist air condenses into clouds? Well, that's what this is. Are the skies cloudier than normal or less cloudy than normal? All right, so let's get ourselves oriented. South America, Central America, Hawaii, New Guinea there, EQ, the equator right there, dateline right there, all important Kelvin wave generation area right in here. Now this is a statistic model. The orange says dry air. The blue, currently over the Indian Ocean, says wet air. So this would be inactive phase, that would be active phase. We go 5 days from now, inactive phase fading, with the active phase starting to leach into the West Pacific. A week from now, right in sync when that storm is supposed to start forming under Australia and New Zealand, active phase shows up. And 2 weeks from now, active phase in control. Now this is a statistic model. The dynamic model, hey, look at that, says the same thing, if not even maybe a little bit stronger. All right, so a little bit of difference from model to model depending on how you look at it. Let's dig in more. Phase diagrams. These, for the statistic model here, dynamic model here. Let's see if we can get this a little bit more centered. There we go. All right. So how do you read these things? Well, the MJO moves from west to east around the planet on the equator, from the Indian Ocean to the maritime continent, that's like Bali, over the West Pacific to the East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, over Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. Where the heavy dot is where the active phase is. The further that dot is away from this circle, the stronger it is. So if you're here and there's the circle, that's a pretty weak active phase over the East Indian Ocean. If the dot was way out here, then it'd be strong. But here's 1, 2, 3 forecast tracks having it moving into the West Pacific at anywhere from almost non-existent strength to very weak status. That's per the statistic model. Dynamic model has the active phase just over the maritime, not even the central maritime continent, and weak 2 weeks from now. So they're both sort of more or less hinting at the same pattern, though the statistic model has the active phase moving a little bit faster than the dynamic model. Let's keep going. Upper level moisture at jet stream level going out. This goes out 40 days. This is a statistic model here. So there's each panel is 5 days long, 8 panels. South America, Central America, New Guinea, equator there, dateline roughly right down the middle. The greens, areas favorable for precipitation, the active phase. Oranges and yellows, inactive phase, dry air, wet air. So this suggests 5 days from now, well, even now, a weak wet air pattern starting to set up in the Pacific and building some into the end of May into maybe the first week of June till about June 8th, something like that. And then here comes the inactive phase. So all hope is not lost. It looks, at least according to all the models, that some sort of weak active phase is going to try to push into the West Pacific maybe about a week or so from now. Let's keep going. And there is yet another model, the CFS model. I think it's a dynamic model. In fact, I know it is. But this also shows you going back in time. And this is the east-west component of the wind. The oranges and reds, westerly anomalies, the active phase, the MJO. In fact, MJO in black here. So here's an active phase of the MJO with its westerly anomalies traversing from west to east from late February into late February, the whole way through the month of March, almost into early April. Okay. Oh, and let's get ourselves oriented. The date line, again, runs right up the middle. So the area we're interested starts in the far West Pacific, 125 east. So from here to about here. So the dotted contours inactive phase, the blues, easterly anomalies. All right, so you see the pattern. Here is our current was the current active phase of the MJO with westerly anomalies. And you see this red here with westerly anomalies in it. That is an equatorial Rossby wave. So it's not all just MJO. There are other forms of what they call them tropical variability or tropical oscillations, though the MJO is like the major big one, so that's why we focus on it. Anyway, here is the inactive phase, theoretically developing right on the hairy edge of the far West Pacific. And here's this big old blob of easterly anomalies over the date line. But here in May into early June, you see westerly anomalies trying to encroach into the far West Pacific, but not making much progress. Okay, some of that has to do with, and I know you've heard this before, developing La Nina. So we'll get into that in a second, and the more you get La Nina, the more you get high pressure. What La Nina really is the exaggeration of the inactive phase of the MJO and easterly anomalies. El Nino is the preponderance of the active phase of the MJO and westerly anomalies. So we're moving from a period of favorable for active MJOs and westerly anomalies into a La Nina period, which is the opposite. More easterly anomalies and less active phases, instead the inactive phase. Okay, one more model. So here's the CFS model going out 3 months. Past performance is on the bottom. The forecast is up here in the top. 850 millibar zonal winds. So the oranges and yellows are westerly anomalies. Consider that the active phase, the MJO. Blues, inactive phase. So there's the date line right there, our all-important Kelvin wave generation area from 125 east, so here, up through about here. This is past performance, our El Nino enhanced active phase here in February, another one in March, but getting fewer and far between inactive phase and easterly anomalies. Here's our current active phase with westerly anomalies, but notice the easterly anomalies really taking root over the East Pacific, and forecast building in coverage and retrograding to the west with the leading edge of this. Where's that? About filling half of the Kelvin wave generation area as we get into the fall. With westerly anomalies, these are the lingering remnant westerly anomalies associated with El Nino, moving, retrograding west, starting to take up shop over the Indian Ocean. So typically that's how it goes. When you're in El Nino, the westerly anomalies and low pressure bias is over the Pacific, and the high pressure bias is over the Indian Ocean, and then during La Nina, it's the reverse. Let's overlay the MJO pattern, just see where we're at. All right, so currently right now, we're not even in an active phase, we're in a neutral phase, but with westerly anomalies. The dotted contour here, inactive phase, so a weak inactive phase showing up mid-May into the early part of June, theoretically, and then theoretically an active phase with westerly anomalies, but you just get the sense the whole MJO pattern is falling apart, and that's pretty typical during the summertime. And then in the fall, things really start taking root. The models are trying to get a guess of what's coming based on current observational data. Okay, let's overlay the low pass filter. All right, this is your low pressure, high pressure bias I talked about earlier. During El Nino, The black contour is a low pressure bias, okay, with 1, 2, 3. We actually had 4 contours. That was the deepest part of El Nino. And you basically see here low pressure fading, fading, fading. As of today, it's pretty much El Nino from a bias perspective is gone. And if anything, this dotted contour here, that's high pressure. This is over the West Pacific. You see the picture here. High pressure over the coming months into August, building, effectively filling the entire Pacific Ocean with the low pressure bias that was in the Pacific, now building with 2 contours over the maritime continent and the Indian Ocean. So clearly the La Nina pattern is coming, at least according to this model. What's going on down in the ocean? Because not MJO, actually El Nino and La Nina, you can see evidence of it deep down in the ocean. This is again data from the TAO buoy array, the series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. See little X's running down the side here and here and here. These are the actual anchor lines on the buoys. The X's are individual temperature sensors on those anchor lines. You take that temperature data along with a model to fill in all the gaps, and you see some of the buoys are down here and here and, you know, out in here. There's actually a project to go upgrade the TAO buoy array, and I think it's more of an international cooperation now, and I think the maintenance on it's going to be a lot better. Anyway, but with this data, even spotty as it is, you can see where the warm and the cold water is. Colder water, the blues, in the east now. Warmer water building in the west. Why is that? Well, this is the East Pacific and West Pacific here, and trades are starting to blow harder than normal. They are scraping all the warm water that develops in the tropical East Pacific off of Ecuador in that area, pushing it all to the far West Pacific near New Guinea. The stronger the trades blow and the longer they blow on average, we're talking like, you know, anomalies, the warmer this area will get. So this is pretty typical pattern. Deeper warm building. In fact, we'll do the analysis. 30-degree isotherm. This is unchanged from last week. It made it to the date line. The 29-degree isotherm, somewhere around 165. And the 28-degree isotherm, actually, it was, I think, 140 last week. It's actually sort of snuck back a little, but I think that's just because there was a little bit of warmer water here, and it's sliding this way, so it drags the isotherm, the contour line this way, but it'll probably be back to 140 in another week or so. All right, but it's not the actual temperatures. It is the anomalies, difference from normal for this time of year. And we see basically piles of cold water at depth. If it was El Nino, this would all be warm water. If you watched the videos all last year, you saw just Kelvin wave after Kelvin wave. That's balls of warm water traveling from west-east, driven by the westerly anomalies associated with the active phase, the multiple active phases of the MJO in the far West Pacific that gave us all the rainfall and the massive snowfall. It wasn't during the El Nino year, it was the year before as El Nino was developing. Okay, and this year, hey, we still ended up with normal, a little bit better, maybe 110% of normal, so that's not so bad. But you see cold water working its way east. That'll eventually erupt at the surface if it's not doing it already. Colder water does not support evaporation. That in turn supports high pressure building. It creates falling air, and then your storm pattern and everything starts focusing on the West Pacific, if not the Indian Ocean. All right, data from another set here. Basically the same thing. This mixes in some satellite data too. But you see colder than normal water off of Ecuador, warm water building in the west. Here is the sea level anomaly data, and the JSON-3 satellite also supports that. If it's beaming down its altimetry or its radar all the time, and it knows how high the waves are, what you do is you take out the waves, the wind waves, and even the tide, and you measure, is the height of the ocean, the sphere of the ocean, higher or lower than normal? Why would that matter? Well, if you have cold water at depth in the ocean, it contracts. The water above it sort of falls, and you get a depression on the ocean surface over hundreds of miles. Also, if you get easterly winds nuking off of Ecuador the whole way across the Pacific, they basically act like a bulldozer and take the whole surface of the ocean and start building it up over in the West Pacific. Okay, so what this is saying here, these are not water temperatures. This is the height of the ocean higher or lower than normal? Oh, and I forgot to mention this during the Jason 3 discussion. It's accurate to, I think, within 2.5 centimeters, which is like an inch, like that much, from a satellite that's up, you know, I don't know, in an orbit 3,000 miles above the planet. It's probably not even quite that high, but that's pretty impressive indeed. Anyway, so you see the ocean height is negative 15 centimeters, 10 centimeters, 5 centimeters. Oh, and there's Chile, Peru, Ecuador. Those are the Galapagos. This is the equator. That's the dateline. New Guinea's out here. Central America, Hawaii here. It's just 5 degrees north and south of the equator. That's what matters. Where sea heights were much higher than normal due to warm water at depth, which expands, which displaces water above it, and westerly anomalies blowing from this way, scraping all the ocean, pushing it this way. Now the opposite's in effect. High pressure starting to build, scraping all the water, pushing it here, and you get this cold water upwelling flow off of Ecuador. So all this is really no different than what we were talking about last week. Upper ocean heat anomalies, here you go. This is the West Pacific, this is the East Pacific. Time goes back a year. Reds and oranges, temperatures above normal, so you can see literally Kelvin waves pushing across. This was last June through into about November and December. The last Kelvin wave was somewhere in December, early January sort of time frame, and then El Nino fell apart. And then here's the coming cold water starting to fill the equatorial Pacific, with warm water starting to recharge. We are in recharge mode now and will be for probably 4 or 5 years, while La Nina starts to decide how strong it's going to be. Sea surface temperature anomalies. Difference from normal for this time of year, and they even take into account the fact that the oceans in general are warming. You can see, let's get ourselves oriented. Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Central America, Hawaii out here, the equator right down the middle. You can see cold water now building along Chile, Peru, Ecuador, and then this is the cold water erupting, that big cool pool that we saw under the equator erupting. Here is the Galapagos Islands here, and now building. This is the first signs, clear signs of La Nina starting to have its influence, meaning cold water at depth and easterly trades building now. So we're in a hybrid state here, a transitional state. Leftover warm water from El Nino around the edges, but cold upwelling cutting right through the heart of it. We're in transition. By fall, it'll be a whole different picture, and I suspect the blues will really be dominant, and all this hot water will be limited to the far West Pacific. The trend for the past 7 days, not as bad. Temperatures cooling, but they've been cool. So this is just showing you the difference over the past 7 days. If the waters are already cool here, then, and they're not getting any cooler, this will just show neutral. So this is still showing here off of Peru and Ecuador and the Galapagos, a little bit of cooling, but in general, we know it's already cold or cooling, not a whole lot cooler, and otherwise a neutral pattern. It's just 5 degrees north and south of the equator that matters. And then the overview, the same basic picture. Remnant El Nino warm water in the east, but with La Nina starting to poke its head out, building along the equator, with warm temperatures building over in this area. Classic La Nina sort of setup. Sea surface temperature trend in the Nino 1.2 region. That is the area. Let's see if we can find it up. Nino 1.2 would be like right here off of Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands. And here we go. Temperature trend today, minus 3/4 of a degree, 707 thousandths of a degree below normal. This, is a very variable area, so it's not, the definitive set of numbers. This would be the Nino 3.4 area. This is on the equator south of California out to about the dateline. Temperatures today, 16 thousandths of a degree above normal. So effectively dead neutral. Neither El Nino nor La Nina half a degree above, half a degree below is just no man's land. But the reason it's sitting here at neutral is because there's the remnant warm water from El Nino still hanging around, while the colder upwelling water intermixes. They both basically cancel each other out, and you end up at neutral. But we don't think it's going to stay that way for very long. The weekly official numbers, those were sort of just rough guess numbers. The official index, so this is Nino 1.2, Nino 3, Nino 3.4, Nino 4. This is the official Nino region right here, that number right there. 0.3 of a degree for the week above normal. You can see where we were up at 2.1 degrees in November and 2 degrees. You know, this was our El Nino thing going on here. Now we're effectively at neutral. The monthly data, well, okay, we are in May, but April is done with. The official index for May is 0.8 of a degree above normal, and we were up at 202. This was back in November and December. That was the peak of our El Nino, and that is, for a strong El Nino, that's, yeah, officially that, oh, well, actually, it's a 3-month period, so I can't say that. So let's go look at the 3-month data. Okay, so for February, March, April, we were at 1.15 degrees above normal. Here was our peak, 1.96 degrees. So that's strong La Nina, not super El Nino, and it's for a 3-month period. Okay, but still, even at that, most of the other strong El Ninos we've seen have been up at 2.3, 2.4, and they're doing it for multiple months. This just barely got to not super El Nino, but solidly in the strong status, and then quickly is on the decline. Right, one more bit of data. All that, what does the atmosphere think is going on? Well, it seems like it'd be pretty obvious. We're in a transition. You can see what's happening in subsurface where La Nina's trying to get going. El Nino is still sort of hanging around, but I think as of literally today, it's over, okay? No big surprise, but it's over. But let's go see. There is the Southern Oscillation Index, the difference of pressure between Darwin, Australia, and the Indian Ocean, Tahiti, and the Pacific. If pressure is lower over Tahiti, the index goes negative. Okay, there's a daily, a 30-day average, and a 90-day average. Daily average, we're at positive, so weekly La Nina, 5.99, but you can see these numbers really jump all over the place, and they've been hovering. The last time we were good negative was back the last part of April, and now we've just been pretty much just neutral. 30-day average takes some of the noise out of this, minus 0.86, so not even 1, so that's pretty much as neutral as you're going to get. And we go back a month, we were at 0.5, minus 5, minus 7, but the trend is definitely to neutral. And the 90-day average, so this is like a 3-month look back, minus 1.25, so where are we, May? So was that February, March, April sort of thing? Even then, with that data, we were only at minus 1.25, and where did we get down to? And 7.7 or 7.9 or something like that. So not a, you'd want to see this down at 15, 30-day average, and when you get good pulses, the active phase, you may go down to minus 25. This El Nino just never made the grade, really. Here's the 30-day moving SOI graphed out. Here was our La Nina with plus 20, plus 25 back in July of 2022. We started January 2023, the beginnings, the building the foundation for El Nino. And then as we got later into 2023, we were already well negative, and then the whole way through 2023. But look at this. Even into January, you see this just steady rising trend. It's almost like El Nino peaked in June of 2023. And when it should normally be peaking in like November and December, it was already on its way up and out. Today, we're at neutral. Yeah, you see things bouncing around, but the reality is the trend is upward. We're at neutral. All the data says neutral. Where are we going from here? Let's see. All right, the CFS model forecast for sea surface temperature anomalies in the Nino 3.4 region. If you have positive anomalies, like 2 degrees above normal, that is bordering 2 to 2.5 degrees is super El Nino. We were right on the threshold of that back in November and December, theoretically. But you see, since then, temperatures have been falling. We're dead. As of today, let's see, is April. That'd be mid-April. Mid-May would be right around here, right above neutral. And as the time we get into May, June, which would be somewhere around here, we're going to be negative. By July, down a half a degree. That's still neutral. Half a degree above to half a degree below, neutral. But then after July, you see us falling. Now, the good news is here, this model was like way down at minus 2.2 or something 2 months ago. Now it's saying, what is that? Minus 1.55 degrees and bouncing off and then rising up from there. That the PDF corrected is probably a little bit better. That one model's a little bit out there. This says temperatures going to minus 1.25 and then heading up. Next month, or not, I'm sorry, next week, we will have the data from the consensus model. It's all like 30 of the El Nino models from all around the planet. We'll see what they say. Last time we looked at this a month ago, they said temperatures would go down to about minus 1 degree, which is not a particularly strong La Nina. The question is, does it do it for 2 or 3 or 3+ years in a row? It sort of builds momentum when it does that. So at least the start of this, potentially not looking too bad. Again, we are still in the spring unpredictability barrier. It won't be till June 1st till we get out of it. The models then get a better handle after we get through spring. And certainly once you get into July and August, then they get a much better, firmer grasp on what's going to happen as we get into fall. Remember, we're trying to predict here what's happening 6 months plus from now. Again, and I don't trust a model a week out or 2 weeks, but, you know, these models actually do a reasonably good job. It's so much better than when I started getting into this game 20 years ago. I mean, just the technology is way better. The computers are way better. They can throw a lot more horsepower at this. So for right now, the good news is we have surf, and we're going to have multiple days of it. The bad news is in Northern California, we're also going to have wind and wind swell. So pick your spots wisely, pick your days wisely, and try to make the most of it. And you should make the most out of it. The models are hinting, though, at another storm pushing under New Zealand a week from now. It is pretty normal the summer after a strong El Nino winter. The New Zealand quarter really fires into about somewhere in the July time frame. So, and so far, I wouldn't say that it's firing, but that's where all the action has been. So we're pretty much on track for a typical post El Nino summer, and this is good. Make the most of it while you can, because next summer it's going to be a whole different ballgame. Probably not as exciting as this summer. There is waves in the water, and water temperatures are up a little bit too, but we're going to have a bout of northwest wind that'll probably start the upwelling machine in California again. Hawaii getting the final pulse of swell now, looking pretty good on the buoy. That's bound for California 2 days from now, so plan accordingly. Long term, you know the drill. We're heading towards La Nina. Better get everything you can while you can now, because pickings will get slim as we get deeper into La Nina, depending on how strong the La Nina is. And again, we got to get out of the spring unpredictability barrier to really know. Right now, things are cautiously optimistic, maybe not a horrendous La Nina. All right, that's our video for this week. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up. If you have questions or concerns, write them up in the comments section. If you haven't subscribed, click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And if you would like to make a contribution to the cause, hit the super thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. We thank you and appreciate all your contributions. And with that, we are done for this week. We will see you again next week. Same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.